Hi, my name is Paul Sargent. We're on the fourth and final episode of our Introduction to the Constitution here for AP Government. And so we're going to look at its ratification and its amendments. But first we're going to start off and we're going to look at sort of the basic ideas behind the Constitution. James Madison is the guy that the Constitution really sort of like, it's his brainchild. He's the father of the Constitution, and definitely you need to know. And he creates this Madisonian model here for how to do this. And the real question is this, like, how do you go and reconcile economic inequality, so people not having the same income levels, with political freedom? Those are the problems. If you give everybody political freedom, they might take away inequality, and inequality could lead to political freedom, blah, 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 blah. But this is the big thing, and then this will be on the AP exam. I can almost guarantee it. The idea of factions, the idea that these groups will form in society which will try to come together to get something done, and it can be a very bad thing if they gain too much power, if they gain control, for example, of the whole government. So the idea was that most of the government is beyond the control of the masses, so that people don't have direct control over all of this. Mostly elections are set up under the Constitution as being indirect. The president is not elected directly by the people. The Senate was not elected directly by the people originally. The courts are not elected by the people. It's really only the House that's originally directly elected. And here we have the senators and the president. The 17th Amendment is when senators become directly elected by the people, and the judges are nominated by the president. And then there's a confirmation process that goes through the Senate. So he decided to deal with these factions. He'd make it so that a lot of the actual offices were not directly going to be chosen people themselves. In addition, he decided that separating powers would be a good idea, and this is your idea of like the three branches of government here. They're relatively independent of one another. They all have very clearly defined roles, and they share power so that the total power of government is shared between these three branches. And there are a lot of things built in, which is really genius, that require consent from one branch. And here are some examples of what this means. The president has a veto power, so laws can't be passed without his consent. Congress allocates money, so the president can't carry out any actions without their consent. Allocate being giving out. The Senate approves presidential appointments. That's for all kinds of office holders. So the president can't just appoint whoever he wants to. There is this idea of judicial review, which is given in a case called Marbury versus Madison. Really, the big thing you need to know about this case is that Marbury-Madison gave judicial review. Later in the course, we'll go through and talk about what this case actually did. But for now, judicial review. And then there's the idea of federalism. And federalism means that you have basically two levels. You have level 1, which is the federal government, and level 2, which is the states, each of which have defined powers, and each of which have some powers over what the others, or ability to stop it. So this is, your general graphic here of how it kind of works. Legislative, executive, and judicial branches all come together. The legislative is made up of two houses, and that's kind of the separation of powers idea. And then in order to sort of pull all this together, a republic is created. Now, a republic is a word that we don't use all that often in our general sort of talk about government. We tend to talk about democracy. But a republic is based on the consent of the governed, and this is the key part of what it is. It's representatives that are making the actual action. So in a republic, people elect representatives to make their decisions. It is conservative, not in that like Republicans as a party tend to get more done. It's conservative in that it favors keeping things the way they are. Change is actually a rather difficult thing, and so what it encourages is moderation and compromise, so that there are no rash reactions under a system of government set up like this, that there's a deliberative process, and that's important. And while this is not actually the clearest picture in the world, here's sort of how Madison broke the voters out, right? They directly elect the House of Representatives. They would elect through the state legislatures, the Senate. They would send members to the Electoral College who would elect the president. The president would nominate the judiciary, and the Senate would confirm the judiciary. So it's all buffered from the people themselves. And this is your checks and balances, which is not an actual term that I just used, but it's a system of checks by which every single branch of government, 1, 2, and 3, have a check on the other branches. There are things that they can do. You can see them outlined here, here, and here. You can find lots of models like this online, but this is the idea. They can all sort of stop each other from taking too much. And so, yeah, as I said, this constitutional republic favors the status quo, and so, yeah, they finished their negotiations, they approved the document, they signed the document. Not everyone's on board. There are people who think that there's really a problem, but they have to go through now and have it ratified. This is put into the Constitution. And the Constitution says you got to go through and ratify it, okay? So you have two groups that emerge, the Federalists, who are for the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who don't name themselves, are kind of named, who are against the Constitution. It's not that they think a Constitution is a bad idea, just like this Constitution is not exactly what they want. Federalists, we'll start with, they tend to be large landowners, wealthy merchants, and professionals. There's a lot of protection of property rights, shouldn't really be a surprise there. And what they wanted is they wanted weaker state governments, a strong national government, indirect election, longer terms of officials, governing by the elite, and then, individual liberties can be less of a concern. Whereas small farmers, shopkeepers, and laborers, who tend to struggle a little bit more, they wanted strong state governments, which could respond to them, a weaker national government. They wanted direct elections so they would have more say. They wanted shorter terms so that they would have more say more often. They wanted kind of rule by the common man so that anyone could be a part of this. And they wanted lots and lots of individual liberties. This turns out to be the most important and biggest argument of the Anti-Federalists. So as they go through and they ratify the Constitution, or some states jump on very early, but the debates in some states, especially Virginia and New York, are really long. And so in the debate over New York, a series of papers are written by Federalists and published so that the people can read them. 85 articles written by Hamilton, Jay, and Madison. And they use this name. I've actually seen this on the AP exam in the past. The name Publius is sort of the pen name they use when they write these. And it's a collection of 85 articles that explain why this Constitution is a good thing. They're still used by constitutional scholars. They're read by the Supreme Court. They're read by a lot of people who are trying to figure out exactly what they were trying to do in the Constitutional Convention. Well, the Anti-Federalists go out and they talk about this lack of basic liberties and say, hey, this is what's really missing. And so the concession given in order to get ratification of the Constitution is that in the very first congressional session, they'll create a Bill of Rights. And they end up being the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that they go through. And so, here are some of here are the Bill of Rights explained by their function, but it's a lot of personal protection, free expression and beliefs. There's privacy in there, or some people would argue there isn't, but there's implied privacy. Lots about the rights of defendants in a criminal case. And then there's a few other rights like the right to bear arms, just compensation for taking property. They put in the Ninth Amendment a great one, like just because we list some rights here doesn't mean these are all of them. There could be more. And then they clarify the state relationship in 10, and they say hey, any powers that we didn't give to the government or deny to the states are state powers, and we'll just sort of take care of that. So how do they go about making it possible to change the Constitution? Well, this is the formal process. There are really two phases. Phase 1 is a national proposal, and Phase 2 is a state ratification. And each constitutional amendment has to go through these two stages. And there are two options. So there's an or here, and there's an or here. You can do one of the two on either side. Every single time, every single amendment has been proposed by 2/3 of both houses of Congress. It's easy. They're already there. They're doing the job. They know procedures, blah, blah, blah. We've never, as a country, called a national convention by Congress on the request of 2/3 of the state legislature. We've never done that. Then how do you ratify it? Well, the most common way is to do it this. 3/4 of state legislatures have to ratify it. Again, they're there. They already have the jobs. They already have the procedures. The 21st Amendment is the only one which has been passed by 3/4 of specially called state conventions where people are elected to go to vote on this one specific issue. This is a long, drawn-out process. I mean, you get 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of all state legislatures to back something means that it's pretty darn important. All right. So as I said, for formal amendments, there's two stages. There's two different routes, and this is sort of like, here's what we've done. This is important. The president has no formal role at all in the amendment process. Formal meaning official, like he can recommend, he can back, he can try and get support of the people, but he doesn't have any actual say in the whole thing. And so what happens because of this formal process over the course of time, with 27 amendments being added to our Constitution, it's become more egalitarian, in other words, more equal. There's been a lot of the removal of slavery, the expansion of citizenship, the expansion of voting rights. Those sorts of things have really made the Constitution more democratic and more equal. The original emphasis on economic issues has later been balanced by the issues of representation and equality, and we've expanded liberty throughout the entire process. But this is not the only way, and it's far more common to amend the Constitution in an informal way. In other words, doing things which actually change the meaning of the Constitution or the way it actually works without changing the words of the Constitution itself. And there are some ways that this has been done. Sometimes we just do things. There are traditions, practices, and procedures that we do which are not constitutional. Political parties we've done, and it's changed what the Constitution means, but it hasn't been an amendment. Political parties are never mentioned in the Constitution. Every time the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, it changes its meaning. Every time we change our political practice, we have an extremely long presidential campaign season nowadays that wasn't in existence. It changes what it means to be president. Technological changes have made big differences on how to do this and how to interpret this, and of course more and more demands on policymakers being made in the world in which we are the sole superpower that's left in the world, and there's a lot more on their plate for the policymakers than there was back in 1789. So anyway, that's about it. That's the Constitution. So I hope these things have really helped, and thanks for watching, and stay tuned as I'll be posting more of these screencasts for different units throughout the year. Have yourselves a wonderful day.